Hey everybody, welcome to Full Draw Friday. I'm Canyon, that's Austin on the other side of the screen. We're going to talk today about overbrowse, what that is, what it looks like, how you can tell that's what's going on, why it's happening, and then what you can do to fix it. So let's jump into it. Austin, I know you've been out, you got a lot of your planting done. I think we talked about that a little bit last week, but some of it, and this is kind of what brought this about, you've got some, what you believe is overbrowsing going on. Before we jump in right into that, though, I guess we should explain a little bit of what that means. So basically, it's pretty self-explanatory. Overbrowsing means that the deer are eating whatever you're trying to plant too much, right? They're not giving it a chance to grow. So obviously, deer are browse animals. They're feeding almost all day on something. And if that happens to be your food plot, if it's, depending on your deer density and what size of the food plot, it may look like someone's been out there mowing it and you can't figure out why nothing's growing. It's potentially because the deer are just out there eating it all the time and they're not giving it a chance to grow. So that's basically what we mean by overbrowse, right? They're eating it way too much, which you would think might be a good problem. But if they never let it grow and it never reaches maturity and then it dies before hunting season, what good has it done you, right? And a lot of times you see this with perennial plantings throughout the summertime. And then you can see it sometimes with annuals, especially early on. If you plant something early, like late July, even early August, if it starts to come up in September, sometimes you'll see them just mow down your annual plot before season ever rolls around. So that's kind of what it is. We'll jump now to how you know that's what's going on. And that's where you'll come in here with the first part of this because, like I said, you've got some stuff that's coming up, got some overbrowsing going on. There's a lot of different ways to know it, but you can go ahead and lead us off with kind of how you've figured out that's what's going on in your situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's two properties in particular that I know I'm having more of a widespread overbrowsing issue, and another property that's having one plot that's an overbrowsing issue. And the reason I'm not running seclusion cages in these particular plots, which I might start just to confirm how everything's growing. And I'm gonna, hit that seclusion cage. Essentially, you're putting up a cage
Like
to
a
keep animals out of it,
Yeah, like a
right?
tomato
So
cage or something.
yeah, like a tomato cage. You can build them round or square, and you stake them into the ground. And the point of those is to allow that particular portion of your food plot to grow without any browse. So you can get a good idea about how, your food plot's taken. If you have an actual soil issue and you need to work on your soil samples a bit better and fertilization and whatnot, or you actually have a legit overbrowsing issue. So, because I'm not running seclusion cages in these plots, the reason I know it's happening is just through observation.
Mm-hmm.
So, I went to these plots. They were looking good. Everything was germinating nicely. Even distribution in the rows. I had them seeded, and these are chicory and clover plots, just so you know, and perennial plots. And everything was coming up real nice. I show up 2 to 3 weeks later to plant the warm season annuals, and it goes real patchy. And there's a lot of spots that were producing that I can't find any clover or chicory in anymore, right? And everything else is looking good. It's not yellowish. It's nice and healthy looking clover and chicory. So that tells me more than likely it's not a soil issue, right?
Right.
And also at the same time, I observe a lot of deer activity in these areas. So either my clients are telling me, hey, yeah, that food plot has deer on it nonstop. Like the cameras are just blowing up, right? Or when I'm out there working and planting, I see deer on it on a very normal occasion, on a regular basis. So just observing how much deer activity is in there. There's tracks all over the place. And then you go to it was looking really good and now it's patchy, right? There's spots that are either, if they're not growing or they're growing very sporadic, and then there's other patches that are coming up amazing. You know what I mean? So that kind of tells me that more than likely I'm dealing with an overbrowsing kind of situation. And two of those properties that I'm talking about that having the more widespread issue Both of those properties are the most high value food in the general area, in the surrounding area, which makes a ton of sense. It's something that I figured I would probably be having an issue with,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that there really is no other good food sources in the general area. If there are ag fields, they're multiple miles away.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So I know there's a lot of deer here. I know there's not a lot of really good high value browse food plots. There might be someone occasionally running a feeder here and there, but I don't even especially deer net this time of year. I mean, they'll hit the feeder, but if it's right there near a green lush food plot, they're going to browse all over that green lush food plot.
Yep.
So, um, that's another reason I figured this is probably the issue I'm having. So it's something that I knew would probably be an issue going into these brand new plantings.
Mm-hmm.
And because they're perennial plantings, they're going to be a little bit slower to establish versus your annual plantings. And
Mm-hmm.
this is something you and I talked a lot about kind of leading into this. Annual plantings have to grow up really quick and get to flower as fast as possible so they can reseed,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where perennials, it might take you a year or two to really establish these plots just because they're growing their root system. That's just part of perennial plantings. That's just how it works. So making sure that those plants are allowed to grow, it can be the hard part in situations like this.
Yep. And you mentioned a lot of things right there of how you can figure out what's going on and if overbrowse is your issue. And if you're seeing all those things, like you said, the tracks in it, or it's real patchy and it was coming up good, and you kind of think it's not the soil, but you're not 100% sure if that's your issue, throw a trail camera out there on your plot. Like, we don't think a lot of times about throwing a trail camera up on a plot this time of year because, your bucks are starting to grow. So if you're not running your cameras year round, you might wait till, let's say, July or August to really kind of start to see what bucks are still around and that stuff. But if you have this issue and you're not 100% sure what's going on, you can go throw one of your cameras up, whether it be a cell camera or a regular camera, because you don't really have to worry about going in and checking the card or whatever. Put it on that food plot and go check it in a few days or a week if it's not a cell cam, and you'll figure out pretty quick if that's your issue. Because if you're seeing 10, 20 does in a half-acre food plot a night, that's probably your problem, right? Or more in a bigger plot, right? So cameras are huge for figuring out if they're actually overbrowsing. If you don't have access to cameras, go out there and sit an evening, like you would hunt it, and just make sure your wind's not blowing over the plot. You get in there and sit, and you'll see pretty quick, because this time a lot of times deer will be out there in the daytime too, right? Early evening.
Yeah.
They'll be out there feeding on it. They feel pretty safe. It's what they need to be doing right now. They're kind of milling around, getting the open, especially if it gets warmer. So you can figure that out pretty quick from observation, like you're talking about, even if you don't have the seclusion cage. But I think is maybe the best way to do it if you don't have either the time to go sit, or you don't want to put a camera up, or you don't have cameras to put up. If you can just go throw a cage around it, you're going to know really quick. And it's pretty impressive when you do that, how much they can actually browse down, right? We talk about looking like it's been mowed. If it's not a huge plot, especially quarter acre, half acre, even an acre, depending on how many deer are in it, they can keep it look like it's mowed. You might have a foot tall after a month. You might have something in that cage that's a foot tall, and everything else is like 2-3 inches, just because they've been hammering it so much. So yeah, definitely those are some really good ways to figure out if this is your problem. If it is your problem, the next thing you kind of need to figure out is why it's your problem. You hit on one of them there when you were talking. Potentially, if it's the best food source around, even if you have some other stuff going for you, which we'll hit on, but if it's the absolute best food source around and it's their preferred, which a lot of times clover and chicory is, especially when it's green and young, right, immature, it's very tender to them, that's going to be their preferred food source almost everything in a lot of cases. Yeah. So they're going to be out there eating it. So that could be your issue, right? It could be that you just have the way more preferred food source than anything else in the area. Other issues you could have, we talked about this on our natural browse series. If you don't have enough browse in the woods for them and you go and plant a food plot, they're probably going to mow the food plot down because they don't have enough other stuff to eat, right? And then another one to look at would be deer density. If there's a lot of deer in the area, and that's something you're going to have to figure out by hunting it, by running trail cameras. You can kind of look at tracks and see what's out there based on, or there are a bunch of fawn tracks and a bunch of doe tracks, whatever. But it's a lot harder without observation. Those are some reasons why you might be having this issue, right? Because you have to know why you're having the issue before you can decide how to fix it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something, with these two properties, the reason we're doing what we're doing is because we are the best food in the general area, right? We're going to attract every single freaking deer in the surrounding radius of that property. That's the point. But at the same time, it causes another issue of one, not creating a doe factory.
Right.
And then two, getting the plots to take, just getting them to grow and establish themselves. And something else I've noticed too is something you need to think about when you're planting. And this goes back to the planning process of what we talked about on an earlier podcast, is your size of food plot, right? All of my bigger food plots, everything acre plus, is growing better than anything smaller, right? And there's a reason for that. And I think I even think the Mississippi State Deer Lab put a research project together and talked about optimal size for food plot. I remember reading this article. I think they were talking about an acre to 4 acres is your number one optimal size of food plot. And it makes sense because then you look at your quarter acre food plot, half acre food plot, and how much quicker those food plots get eaten down compared to your half acre.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, compared to your full acre or 2 acre plot, and then two, it's creating enough food availability. We go talk about the browse too, or if you don't have a lot of browse, so you're trying to create it via food plots, is if you only planted that one half acre section versus having a few others together with it, you know what I mean, to create more of an ecosystem along with that food, and to set it up accordingly for, you can set it up in many different ways. We talk about with planning it out, but if you don't have enough of it available, they'll just sit on it and mow down that small little food plot that you planted, So knowing this was going to be an issue, we knew that we had to establish a significant amount of it to give the rest of it a chance to grow, to kind of evenly distribute our browsing, give the rest of it a chance to grow. And it's working, but there's portions of those food plots that you can tell that the deer are congregating in the most, and those are the patchy, eaten down areas. And while everything else is growing, which is great, everything's establishing itself, but we also don't want a patchy food plot as best as we can, right? So we want everything to establish itself, but it can be tricky at this stage of a brand new perennial food plot, is just getting those plants to establish themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where you're talking about with the planning kind of leads into the solutions, or how you can kind of try to solve the problem. Planning is definitely a big one, whether that be, because like acre to 4 acre, definitely ideal for amount of forage and avoiding overpressure, right, on it and all that kind of stuff. When it comes to bow hunting, though, a lot of times that quarter acre, half acre food plot's where you're going to have a better chance of killing those deer, right? Because it just closes everything in, and you can kind of funnel them a little bit better in front of your stand. But when you're planning that out, hey, I've got 5 total acres I can do with food plots. Maybe I put a couple, one acre plot here, a 2 acre plot here, that are my bigger ones that I'm going to take some pressure off the other ones. And then I've got a couple quarter acre, a couple half acre here and there that I'm going to have stands on, right? And not to say you can't hunt the bigger plots either, because you absolutely can, especially depending on your food plot design and how you can pinch them down. And maybe we'll talk about that sometime too. You can create bow shots in those plots, but it is a lot easier to get a bow shot in a quarter acre plot than it is a 3 acre plot. I mean, just there's more places for them to be in the 3 acres, right? So plan that stuff out to where maybe your smaller kill plots, we like to call them, are your annuals, right? Because the thing about annuals, and again, sometimes they'll get overbrowsed too, just depending on how early you plant them and what your deer density is. But the thing about them, like you said earlier, they're trying to get up and flower as fast as possible. So they're going to grow faster. So even if you do have some pretty heavy browse, a lot of those plants are going fast enough to keep up with it or overcome it, right? Depending on just how much it is. So if you got those quarter-acre, half-acre plots and you can put them in an annual brassica plot, you can mix some clover in that for sure, and that's a way you can kind of establish those clover plots as well, is to mix them in with something like a kale or triticale or a lot of different kinds of brassicas in the fall. Try to get them established in the fall, and that way they're browsing on the brassicas that are coming up in the fall, and then they've got all winter, they lay dormant, and they come up one of the first things in the spring, right? They come back. So that's one solution to it. A lot of times if your end goal is a perennial plot, is to start it in the fall with an annual plot. But back to the planting part, if you can go ahead and plan to put those smaller plots into an annual, a lot of times you're going to have better chances later in the year too, because when that clover's gone dormant, depending on what climate you're in, you're getting up into late November, December, if it's starting to get real cold, if you get some snowfall or whatever, that brassica plot might be where those deer are going to be anyway. So you're going to have more shot opportunities longer in the year, but also you're going to have a better chance of having a viable food plot where they're going to come in and feed throughout the season, because it's not ate down to dirt, right? So the planning part of it's a big one for sure. When you're talking about deer density, this is one that I think a lot of guys fail at, because whether it's just a lot of work or they don't want to mess with the does, whatever it is, and it's not a quick fix either. A lot of this stuff is not a quick fix, right? There's very few quick fixes to your overbrowse problem, whether it's because you need better natural browse, or because you have too high a deer density, or because you're the best food around, right? Not a lot of quick fixes. And one of those that's not is to lower your herd numbers. Well, how do you do that? Shoot some does, right? A lot of guys don't necessarily like to do that, because, I mean, who wants to just go out and kill a bunch of does? But if you talk to like we'll call them elite land managers out there, and guys that have just these big, beautiful properties with lots of big bucks on them and good herd ratios and great food plots, they're killing an ungodly number of does every year. And if you talk to them, you may not know that by whether you're watching their TV show, because they're not showing you all their doe kills, right? But they're out there, whether it be early season with the bow or late winter season, if you have an antlerless only season, like they're just laying down doe after doe after doe, because that's how they avoid overpopulation of deer and too high a deer density.
Yeah, and you have to remember those big bucks prefer not to be amongst the rest of the herd. You know what I mean? So if you're trying to create something that is really good hunting and holds mature bucks outside of the rut, like all year, you're not just bringing deer in for that rut movement,
exactly,
right? Which is unpredictable to hunt if you're hunting a specific buck, right? And if you're wanting to hold deer all year round, then yeah, you're going to have to keep more control of that deer population. That way you're even keeping bedding cover available for those bucks, not just food, but bedding cover available for those bucks too, you know? So, yeah, and that's something I think that we're moving to in a good way, is better doe management, for especially the people who really understand the herd management side of things, instead of keeping this kind of an old school way of thinking, don't shoot any does, the bucks come to the does, which you're right to an extent.
Yeah, for a couple weeks.
Right to an extent. You're great hunting for a couple weeks.
Yep.
And then you really don't have much out there besides young bucks and does. So it's a balancing act, and making sure you've got a good balance of your herd, and it trickle effect to your browse, your food plots, and bedding cover availability.
Yep. Some other ways, and I know you talked about this, nurse crops. You said you planted a clover and chicory mix. A lot of times, if you mix in like chicory or alfalfa with your clover, or even if the buckwheat, you go in and do that, which is also can be used as a cover crop, right, throughout the summer. If you go in and mix those, that can help with your overbrowse too, right, because those will germinate faster and take some of the pressure off if you're wanting a clover plot in the end, right?
Yeah.
It is kind of what we do when we plant clover, is we always try to put something like an alfalfa or a chicory in it. Now, like what you're talking about, there's times where they'll just browse it all down, but that's another potential fix, is to plant something else with your perennial that's going to help it take some of the pressure off through the summer.
Yeah, and that's something that I'm going to do now that is seeing the issue that we're having with the overbrowsing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come back with some buckwheat. But buckwheat is an aggressive germinator. It's easy to grow. It'll grow with darn near no water. So
Right.
it's a fantastic cover crop. It'll help control your weeds and grasses in your plot and other competition. Also, deer love it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good forage for deer. So it's a food availability on top of, the clover or chicory that you're trying to get established. So that's what I'm going to do is broadcast out some buckwheat and give it a chance to kind of fill in some of the gaps. And then look into in the fall, going back with an annual, right? And doing kind of a brassica or like a crimson clover or winter wheat, different
Mm-hmm.
things along those lines that will help fill in those gaps, provide food, and also work as a cover crop throughout the winter.
Yep.
That way, going into spring, you've got a good cover crop to keep the weeds suppressed and grasses suppressed, and help that first of the year growth on your second year
Mm-hmm.
clover. You know what I mean? And then you can come in and frost seed, over that cover crop that you
Mm-hmm.
have going. You can frost seed in some more of your perennial if that's your absolute end goal is that perennial. So that it's kind of a step process, but you see that's a full year process. It's the kind of thing where you might be fighting the battle for a year or two, but once you get it established, it'll be much easier to control and keep it a good growth, keep good forage in there year round.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my plan moving forward is I'm going to go in there, hit it with some buckwheat, and then see throughout the summer, because we're getting pretty late now for even throwing any clover out,
Mm-hmm.
unless you're going to throw like a crimson or something a lot like that. But
Right.
yeah, your
There.
your your new perennial clover will get burnt.
Yeah.
We
It's
have a
gonna dry
month
out
until we
and
get into. Yeah, it's
exactly.
going to dry out awfully fast. And so, and my issue here in Kansas is getting any rain in the fall.
Yeah.
So when it comes to like a brassica plot and doing fall plantings, we have real bad drought issues, especially the further west we get. So
Mm-hmm.
getting any rain or enough rain that August September timeframe could be a shot in the dark. So if you only planned on having a fall plot and you don't get any rain, well, you kind of
You're not gonna have a fall
SOL on
plot.
that deal. So
Exactly. Your best chance at that point is to go in and plant some kind of winter rye or winter wheat, right? And then at least you have
yeah,
a winter plot, but you really kind of miss that good window of
yeah,
October, October even into
mhm,
November where you got that form, a draw form in October that's not the rut
yeah,
before that gets there, right? And that's one thing that
yeah,
we've struggled with too the last few years. I'm sure everybody has. And a reason that I've gone to a lot of perennials and a lot of clover is because, and I'm splitting it up a little bit this year, but at least I have that clover that's established if it does dry out and I can't do anything in the fall, right? And the other thing is
yep,
you can use that clover as a cover crop or on that for your fall plots too. Even if it looks like you're going to have rain, you can go in there and disc that clover under or till it up, whatever, even just spray it and then go broadcast your brassicas, plant your brassicas over the top of it or drill it in, whatever. And the nitrogen from that clover is really going to help your fall plots too. So that's
absolutely.
one thing you can do even with the perennial. Then what you're talking about with buckwheat, which is what I'm probably going to do for my fall plots this year, because I know the issues we have with the droughts, is if you can go in and plant that buckwheat, or even if it's winter wheat left over from the year before that you just leave out there, if you do it right and go in and then you broadcast into whatever standing cover crop you have, and then if it's wheat, you might have to mow it, right? If it's buckwheat, you can just go in and roll it over and spray it. But then
Mhm.
it creates a really good seedbed and holds a lot of moisture in. So even if you're low on moisture, it gives your fall plot a lot better chance to grow, which is what I'm going to try to do there. Um, but one more kind of solution on your overbrowse issue, right? Because we talked about a lot of times it's with your perennials. If it's with your annuals, likely either your plot's not quite big enough or you have too many deer, right? So if you're not able to
Yeah,
grow your annual plots, those are probably the two biggest issues. Natural browse obviously being a big one too. We talked about that a lot in that series, so I won't hit on that too much. But with the other two, if you can either make your plot a little bit bigger or you can shoot more does, and it's probably going to help that problem for the next season, right? If your perennials are the problem, if your plot's big enough, if you feel like you have good natural browse, it might be a deer density issue. And maybe it's not. Maybe you feel like you're at a good number, but you still can't grow those. It may be because, like what you said, it's the absolute best thing around and the deer just prefer it so much that they're going to eat it no matter what. It might be a deal where you just have to go to some type of, like a Milo, some type of grain that they're only going to eat in the fall, right? Or summer cover crop or winter wheat, leave it throughout the summer and then go in with an annual, right? You might just have to give up on trying to do your perennials, go with something else for a while. Yeah, try to establish them in your annual plot if that's still really what you want to do. But if you just, year after year, you're beating your head against the wall trying to get these deer out of it, and you feel like you have good natural browse, and you feel like your food plot's as big as you can get it, as big as you want it, if you feel like your deer numbers are decent, might be one of those deals where you have to change your game plan a little bit and just start trying annuals, right? Like, sometimes you have to change directions.
Oh, absolutely. And that's, don't be afraid to, throw an audible. You know what I mean? It's just part of the game. This isn't, management and hunting, all of that stuff. It's a long-term game. There's no real short-term success in this. And if you're going into doing this with the expectation that I'm going to make it look amazing immediately, you're already losing because your mind's not right.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, and all you're going to do is disappoint yourself. You're just going to be disappointed because it's just not how it works. So this is a long-term game, and you have to understand that. And once you really understand that, you have a more open mind to, hey, I'm having trouble with this. Why don't I try this? You keep making adjustments, and then eventually what's going to happen is you're going to find that perfect medium, and it's going to look like that perfect plot that you had the vision of it when you first started. You know what I mean? And then at the same time, maybe it's not that perfect plot that you had envisioned at the beginning. Maybe it's not that particular food that you wanted. It's a different food, but it still looks amazing. You know what I mean? And there's a lot of variables that can go into that, could play into that. It could be your soil condition. Maybe your soil condition does not allow this particular planting to grow well, but this particular planting grows very well in it. So it's that simple as well. So you just got to, really figure out the conditions that the hand that you're dealt, and then make adjustments from there. And it will turn out as long as you stay persistent with it. You know what I mean? So, and there's nothing wrong with making adjustments and giving it time.
Right.
At all. That's kind of the fun part. I like the process.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I'll throw this in too before we wrap it up here. You talked about the soil there. That's something too to definitely make sure you take that in consideration. Do your soil test and see what's going on, because if you're trying to do a perennial, if you really want to do a perennial and you feel like it's just not going to grow because the deer keep overbrowsing it, do your soil test and see what's going on, because they might be eating it down before you can really tell, like if it be starting to yellow as it matures, right, where it's not getting the nutrients it needs. It could be that your soil is not good enough that it's growing fast enough to overcome the browse pressure, right? It might not be that they're overbrowsing it. It may be that your plants aren't growing fast enough to beat what the deer are coming in there and eating, right? So make sure your soil is good, because in that case, you may see your annuals not do well either. If your soil is really bad altogether, the annuals might not even grow fast enough to overcome all the browse pressure. Your perennials definitely aren't, right? So make sure that your soil is where it needs to be, and that's the first step I tell everybody when it comes to food plots is make sure your soil is where it needs to be. Do your test. If you need fertilizer, spend the money on fertilizer, because it's going to save you money in the long run. And it might be the difference in being able to plant your perennial plot that you want and having to go to an annual, or being able to get anything to grow, right? If it's not conducive to that stuff growing as fast as it needs to, the deer are always going to eat it down, because it's never getting the chance to grow before the deer get to it. They're eating it all when it's young because it's never going to get past that anyway.
And then, if you do have a poor soil condition, you can use an aggressive germinating annual as you work on fixing your soil conditions, because buckwheat is one of those. It's a very aggressive germinating food that you can use, is fantastic as a cover crop. Deer eat it and it'll grow in a whole lot of pretty miserable conditions.
Yes, it will.
And it's cheap.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's kind of one of those things. And there's other food like that. Winter wheat is the same way, going into a winter cover crop, or rye that you talk about. So, there's different things you can use. So really do your research into that stuff. But, knowing your soil conditions actually can save you a lot of time when it comes to figuring out what's wrong with your food plots.
Yep, no doubt.
So,
well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up for this week. I think we covered a lot of that. We'll figure out something for next week, whether we decide to go back with another management or we go back to strategy and see what we come up with there. I appreciate everybody tuning in. That's Austin over there. I'm Canyon. Make sure you check out Tactical Approach Outdoors for anything you want from Austin, whether that be his awesome merch or whether that's consulting services, or if you're out in his area and you need some food plots put in, you just don't know where to start. He'd be your guy to talk to. So go check him out there. You can check us out at ridgehunteroutdoors.com and raxmineral.com. Don't forget about them, our partner for the podcast. All that said, we'll catch you guys next week. Thanks for watching.